Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I show a fun slow stitching technique of using the blanket stitch. That simple stitch that usually edges blankets to give it a somewhat finished look. But instead of just doing it on the edge of a blanket, we're going to make it into a circular shape, like a rosette. Now the beauty of this stitch is it's very forgiving. You can make wide stitches, short stitches, long stitches. You can change the color of the thread you use at almost any point of your stitching. I change the color for every concentric circle, and it gives a pretty effect. Now you could play with this and make gradients if you want, or you could use a rainbow of colors. And you can make as many layers as you'd like. You don't have to stick to a perfectly nice circle either. You can make an oval or an organic shape, or really any shape, even a square. So we'll start today's video and I'll show you the process for making that circular blanket stitch. So here's the blanket stitch. Now it's a very unusual stitch. It usually goes around the edge of a blanket or any particular object or any shape. But as you can see here, when you make it into a rounded shape, it becomes something altogether very different. It kind of looks like a spider web at some point, or a bullseye. And so that's really fun. You don't have to worry about getting a perfect circle unless that's what you want. And in that case, I'd suggest tracing your image so that you know exactly where to stitch. And I'll show you what I mean. So here I have an old scrap of a quilt that I'm going to use here. I like it because it's padded and it just gives me a lot to work with. I'm going to take a large circle and put it right here. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you want it to be a precise circle, I'm just going to trace around it. And this is a Frixian marker pen. It's sold in the office supply section and it's erasable. They're usually sold in sets with a bunch of colors. It doesn't matter what color you use, I just want to be able to see where my lines are. And then you can choose another circle. You can either trace another circle inside of it, just like this, or you can eyeball it. So my last circle will be this. And as you can see, they're different widths, and that's just totally subjective, whatever you want to do for your piece. So to start with, I'm going to start on the inside here, and I just have a long piece of thread. This is embroidery floss, and it's a large needle here, large enough eye to hold that thread, all 6 strands. You can use any strands you want or any thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little dot in the center of my circle. And again, I'm just eyeballing it, but that's how I'm going to start this. You choose any point around that perimeter of that inner circle. So I'll start on the outside. This is approximately at 12 o'clock. Pull my thread through, and then I'm going to pull the needle down right through that center dot. Now I'm not going to pull the thread completely taut. You see there's a little loop here. I'm going to come up underneath my fabric, again on that line of that circle, whatever distance I want. If I want a large distance, it will make a larger stitch. This is approximately 1/4 inch or so. And I'm going to try and get it right on that line. And I'm making sure the loop goes behind that needle. And then when I pull up my thread, that area that I came up for the needle will yank that thread to the side. So then I'll come back down into that same hole in the center again leaving a little loop, and I make my next stitch. Again, I'll just try and go about 1/4 inch on that center circle in that loop, and I yank it again. Now all my threads are going to come back to that center on this circle and on this circle only. So I'll come back in right to that center hole, make a stitch, again 1/4 inch or so from that previous stitch through that loop, and I'm yanking it all the way around. And I'll continue this all the way around. So I go as close to the center hole as I can get, pull my stitch mostly through, create that distance, and I have all these stitches. And I'll continue this all the way around. This is the center of my spider web or of my circular blanket stitch. Now if you vary the length of those stitches, you'll get different pieces here, different aspects. So I want to come down in the center again, keep my loop open, come up through that loop. And now to end it, because I want to change color for my next row, and that's totally optional, I'm just going to bring my stitch down right through that first stitch that I made. And I have a very beautiful center circle, kind of like a little bit of a web. I'll turn my fabric over and make a knot here, just to tie off my thread. And then I'll snip my thread. So there I have that first web, or that first circle with the blanket stitch. So now I'm changing my color thread because I like that look. So I have a blue here with a knot at the end. And I'm going to come up again. I'll start at maybe the 12 o'clock. You can start anywhere on the circle. It doesn't matter. And then I'm going to come down right underneath that first circle of stitching that I did. I'm going to leave my loop right up top here. And then I'm going to come up on that circle, that line that I traced, and just make that stitch. I'll pull that snug, and I have my first stitch. So now on my circle, because I'm going down to meet this little circle here, I want to just go with my stitch just like 1/8 of an inch away. I don't have to go that far away. So I'll make my stitch, and then up top here I'm going to continue with my loop up top so that I can make another stitch here on that circle. And I'll continue this all the way around, where I go up the same distance approximately on this purple circle, and the same distance with my stitch by waiting with a loop on the top circle. So for that first circle, the one we did in purple, all our stitches are going to meet in the center point. But for our next one, they're going to work their way around like spokes of a wheel around that purple circle. So again, I go 1/8 of an inch. I leave the loop up top, and I go a little bit of the ways. And you can vary this as much as you like. Come back down. And it's a very interesting effect, and the tighter the stitches are together, the more filled in it is. There's less space. It's like a tight screen versus a very large sieve. So it has different effects with what colors you use all along your circular blanket stitch. I'll continue all the way around, and then end off my stitch when I get very close to this last stitch. So I have one more stitch to go. Come down very close. I come up very close to that where I began. And then I just want to take my stitch and set it down. Again, I'll flip it over and knot off my thread. And from the back, it kind of looks like a flower. And from the front, we're getting kind of a wheel. For my last row, I'm going to make my stitches a little closer together, and I'm going to use this pink thread. So again, I start approximately at 12 o'clock, pull my thread, come down here, make my loop, and I'll make a little stitch, maybe 1/4 inch from where I first came in. I'll do the same thing here. My next stitch, I'm only going 1/8 of the way from that blue circle and 1/4 of the way from the top. And I'll work my way all the way around. It's kind of an interesting effect. And the width of the stitches really makes a difference. So it's really what you're in the mood for. They can be as long as you want them to be, as tight, close together, and it's a very pretty effect. So when you do your blanket stitch, there are basically 3 points to remember. Where you come up, where you anchor your stitch down, and then where you come up again to make the width of that stitch. And over here I had some tighter stitches, and here they're a little looser. It looks very handmade and rustic. I like to use my finger here, my index finger, to hold that loop open so that I can come down in it. Again, I'll come back here, come back up, and just continue to work my way around. Tighter stitches take longer to make. The larger ones take fewer stitches. So that is easily understood. You can line up your stitches, and then you can also weave through these stitches once they're done. It's really up to you. There's a lot of possibilities for this technique and this stitch. So now when you're bringing your stitches down to meet the other circle, whether it's the blue stitches to meet the purple or the pink to meet the blue, just keep in mind that you want all your stitches to be the same, meaning you want them all to either go on the outside or the inside of the piece you've already set down. So by that I mean I've been going to the outside of the blue circle, which is here. If I was going to the inside, I'd cross over that stitch. But I'm just going to the outside. So I want all my stitches to remain going to the outside or the inside, whichever one I started with. You can also go and tack it down, like I can tack these down with that same blue thread, and it wouldn't be noticeable. But the longer the stitches, the looser they become. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing your stitching. Again, continuing with these loops. So I'll just continue around this row and just on that sketch of a circle that we made. And this keeps the shape. Just want to finish up this row. So this is another way to make a closed shape, whether it's circular or oval. It doesn't matter. It just gives a very fun effect, and it can even look scalloped in a way. So when I have my last stitch, I'll just bring it down to where I started so that I have a closed shape. I'll flip it over and knot the back. So here I have the completed blanket stitched circle. I used 3 circles. You can continue this as many circles as you want to make it as large as you want. And again, you can vary the stitches by keeping them closer together. Here's another shape that I did, and this one was kind of organic, oval-ish. And the difference is I hooked the circles that I was building it upon through the outer edge of the circle previously, whereas here I stayed on the outside and here I crossed over to go right on the inside. And it's a different effect. So you can see the different effects you get. Here I have my little medallion that I can use in my work, and here's one that I'm going to keep on my little block here and stitch around it and add embellishments that way. So that's my process for using the circular blanket stitch. It opens the door to many possibilities and many shapes that are closed using that stitch. And you can make many layers, so it can look like a cell or different aspects of a rosette. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe. And thanks for joining me today.